Good morning. The report's 50 pages and comes with a health warning, but I won't be reading it out for you. We're just going to storytell a little bit. First half of today, luckily, is still in the analog world where we work before we go into things like AI. Manifest, a brilliant starting point for us because, forever, masculinity was assumed as something that men were born with, whereas femininity was something women had to learn. Manifest says that even men need to manifest. They need to start manifesting who they are. It's not given. Their biological identity is not going to be enough going forward. I'm going to just broadly talk about 3-4 big ideas today and then open to questions. If you just pull back and think about the world we live in, the known written history of this world is really just the history of men. This is what you see. If you just think back of all the people you think about when you talk of great history, when you go to cities, the statues you see. Even when you think of God, in most cultures, God is masculine. Even today, most research, including medical research, is largely done on men. We're talking 2025. Our 2,000 years of history tells us only one thing, that masculinity was the norm. It was assumed that you were born male, and you were socialized into ideas that we assumed you will win wars, you will rule, you will lead, you will earn the bread. It was largely assumed, whereas to be a woman was something that had to be learned. Men did not know their gender. The problem we are dealing with today is that men are having to learn they are also a gender. Men never knew their gender. Men don't understand what gender meant historically. What really happened? What happened to this man? 2 things happened. The world changed. Unfortunately, men didn't, or they changed rather slowly. I'll just talk about a few changes very quickly. Traditional gender differences, women do nurturing, men go and earn the bread. Those lines are blurred. Technology suddenly said men don't have to be strong, they don't have to be powerful because anyone can do the job. Feminism, one of the most interesting words in the last 20 years is feminism. Women decided that they are going to create the language and the vocabulary and the ideas through which they're going to articulate who they are as a collective. Do men have an equivalent language today to talk about the new man? Afraid no. What we are seeing actually is a crisis in masculinity. I'm going to just talk about it very briefly. In one line, the crisis is simple. The masculinity designed to conquer the world is doing a terrible job when we need to save it. That men know better, that men know all, that all knowledge passes through men is up for debate. The feminist conversation has moved beyond gender equality to gender equity, where we are now saying it's not about equality in rights, it's about the unique gifts, the unique values, the unique perspectives that the other gender has. And that's incredibly valuable. We're not talking about female capital. We're talking about the economic loss of Silicon Valley because they don't have enough women leaders. In India, we've talked about a $1 trillion boost if we could have more women in the workforce, etc. So the global conversation has moved on. So what is the unlearning men are having to do? They're having to move from being the norm to becoming aware of themselves as a gender. Men are no longer the norm, they're just another gender. I'll just read one. I only have one chart with a lot of words in it, yeah? Since time immemorial, men have been carrying the responsibility of heroicness. Men are driven by glory, a fundamental socialized conditioning to be approved by society for being the man of the house, the family, and the nation. They're brought up addicted to approval and feel empty without it. They need the constant dopamine fix for being approved by the world and women. If nobody's clapping, it means no one loves you. Without the constant stream of approval, men lose their sense of self-worth. So frankly, nothing changed. If you really think about it, men are exactly what they were. The world changed. And suddenly men find themselves on the wrong side of culture. And men are wondering, what did I do wrong? I'm the same guy. I have the same ideas about myself, I dress the same, I talk the same. Suddenly my behavior is being called out, my masculinity is being called out, my social norms are being challenged. So men didn't change and they're wondering what changed. Why are they suddenly on the wrong side of a conversation they were, the heroes of, yeah? So actually masculinity has a massive branding problem. When we think of the word masculinity, most people think automatically of toxic masculinity. It's like there's no other idea of masculinity now, it's only toxic. So it's like this project is really to say, how do we rebrand this problem? How do we think of it as a branding problem, yeah? It's a little bit like what happened to big, when we started questioning capitalism and industrialization. Big became a bad word, Big big tobacco, big tech, big pharma, big food. You heard of big, right? But a big, suddenly a bad word. That's what's happened to man. Man is the new bad word. So from being designed for heroicness, today this man has become the new villain. Anything men say is bad. So we have a whole language sort of ecosystem now which is talking about man words as if they're bad words. So that's how far masculinity has fallen. This is really where this project really starts. So society decided we need a new man. The man we have is not good enough. He's toxic. He's not useful. He's responsible for everything, for crime, for violence, for rage. He's responsible for 80% of all evil in society. So we need a new man. And that project had only two parts. Let's dismantle patriarchy. Let's just dismantle it because patriarchy is the problem. And second, let's establish progressive gender norms. Let's find new norms for men. Let's teach them new etiquette, new socialization, new dress codes. Let's groom them. Let's educate them. Just to quote somebody everybody's familiar with. Basically, we're asking men to renounce Vin Diesel and embrace Ryan Gosling, and men won't go for it. They're too afraid to let go of things just because you think they're unhealthy. And this is from India, but anywhere in the world. We also started doing a lot of progressive masculine portrayal in our communication, in our media. Actually, what happened? Did it work? Polarization and divergence actually instead of the gender convergence and the understanding we were hoping for. All our work on dismantling patriarchy and trying to do positive portrayal of masculinity has actually led to exactly the opposite consequences. Men suddenly feel in chaos, their structure taken away from them, they have identity confusion. So they've actually regressed back to people who sort of re-established very traditional, very primal masculine norms because there's safety and security there. And this is one of the most interesting data we came across, which tells you how much gender divergence has grown in the world. This is voting behavior, liberal versus conservative of women and men. And you can see that in almost every culture now, that gap is growing between women and men. Women voting more liberal, men voting more conservative. And that's 18 to 29-year-olds, just that age group. So all our conversation about the new man has led to more divergence, has led to more growth and voice in the manosphere, and more gender divergence. So this is really how we see the problem. Men are caught between two conflicting messages. The liberal conversation, which sort of rectifies toxicity in masculinity but takes away all purpose. And the manosphere amplifies purpose, does so by reinforcing traditional hypermasculine norms. And I think nobody is better than Zuckerberg's own confusion to talk about this, So 2017, Zuckerberg was talking about diversity, DEI, and now he's talking about the need for masculine energy, 2025. So you can see even Zuckerberg is confused. With all the Facebook data he has, even he's confused what's going on. So you can't blame the men in this room too much. Our interest is actually in India, what's happening here, right? And the male child in India occupies very special privilege. This is a society where the greatest love story is meant to be between the mother and the son, not between the husband and the wife, not between partners, between the mother and the son. If you see our popular culture, you will realize that's the ultimate romantic story in our culture. I don't know how many of you know that we actually don't even have the Oedipus complex in our culture. We have the reverse Oedipus complex where the son is sort of, sacrificed for the father because the father sees the son as such a big rival. So all our stories are the castration of your own son so that the father's social life continues. Social and sexual life continues uninterrupted. So being male in India, being male is a privilege because it's the primary method of transferring skills, legacy, fame, power, and wealth generationally. The chain, the conduit of all ideas, all knowledge, all power, as in many other cultures, is to the male child. And we are a deeply hierarchical society, which means that everyone knows their position. In a country of 1.4 billion people, it is very easy to be anonymous, to be nobody. So the only project for most Indians is to be somebody. It's how do you be somebody? And for that, we have a social model. I won't go into all of that, called Sanskritization and Westernization, where you imitate the rituals and customs of a class above you and sort of hope for social mobility. So that's really the only job. And that job is very important because today we call it success, progress, we call it wealth creation, but it's exactly the same job. It's a sort of attempt at prestige. The interesting thing in India is that there's a very clear patriarchal compact The compact is that if you sacrifice your personal desire and interest for patriarchy, you will be rewarded enormously. If you take on the core jobs of provider protector, which is expected from patriarchy, if you sign up for that, the reward is enormous. And that's why the biggest victims of patriarchy are not women, they are men. If you go back in time, the people who have most been sort of traumatized by patriarchy are men themselves. And that's the core deal. This was the deal, that you get great privilege, great power, if you sort of work within patriarchy. The problem today is this compact is broken. We live in a country where नौकरी और छोकरी दोनों बहुत मुश्किल हो गया है लड़कों के लिए. It's become a very difficult job. That compact doesn't deliver anymore. We are in the midst of the largest economic crisis. We are in the midst of the largest job crisis. We are in the midst of the largest mating crisis in this country. I'll give you some data. So we all know the queues for jobs, the amount of time you have to spend for jobs. Women have now emerged as a threat, as a challenge. They're more employable, they're more social, they're often more educated. 870% rise in leadership courses. Women rate 80% of male profiles as below median attractiveness. This is Bumble study. 80% of men below attractiveness. Median attractiveness, not even uncontrollably attractive. So what men are feeling is that this system is rigged against them. From being the history of the world being the history of men, from being designed for heroicness, to finding themselves the wrong side of culture and wondering what changed because they didn't, to now sort of realizing that there's a world which seems to be not working for them. It's like the whole system. You'll be amazed how many people talk about divorce laws being rigged against them, how many people talk about guilty before proven innocent if anything happens. So the whole psychology of men is that the system seems to be working against them. Another quote, a few years ago I had a breakup and was extremely depressed. I felt that the girl had a lot of power. I felt even I wanted that power. This is not an ordinary guy, this is a guy with a following. So actually on the face of it, we are seeing the reaction, right? We're seeing rage, misogyny, increase in disillusionment, in crimes. We're seeing the rise of the anger genre, if you like. So we're seeing the rise of the anger genre. But actually when you interrogate this a little more deeply, what you realize, before that. So the anger genre actually plays to the core masculine fantasy, which is why for most traditional ideas of masculinity are only available in epic form. They're not available in everyday secular life. You have to create blockbusters like Pushpa and Bahubali to access those heroic ideas now, mostly, because they're not credible in your everyday life, right? So the solitary myth of the solitary hero, which is the traditional male discourse, which glorifies independence, resilience, at the expense of collaboration, and what data is telling us actually is that beyond the rage and beyond the anger is a very lonely man. So we're also suffering from a culture of extreme masculine loneliness. And there's some startling data. Raj Shamni talks about how 15% people feel there's nobody in the world they can even talk to, not even their own mothers and family. 2.5x more chances. So I think we need to sort of move away from this branding idea that men are bad, responsible for everything that's wrong in the world. Toxic masculinity, partly true, but also recognize there's a real crisis and that men are dealing with a reality they're not equipped with. They're dealing with ideas that are ahead of them and they don't have the language and vocabulary and the resources to navigate them. And the sort of dismantling of patriarchy and this attempt at a progressive discourse has actually only increased the divergence, the gender gap. It hasn't solved it. This actually is my key slide. What we need to recognize in India is that the problems with masculinity are not personal problems. They're not character issues. They're not issues with people's character. They're a structural problem. The Indian economy, the Indian social system, the Indian market demands men to be of a particular kind. It demands certain qualities in men to survive. And just before I go into slides, it demands them to be very competitive. It demands them to be successful. It demands them to be Uber providers and protectors. It demands that if you're not successful, you're nobody. It demands a lot of material sort of resources to be accumulated, to be of any consequence. So the structure, unless we change the structure, we are not going to be able to move masculinity forward. So this is the expectation. Expected to be rich, successful, upwardly mobile. There is no room for failure. This is not a culture where failure is tolerated, even today. Over-valorization of success or win at all costs attitude. Scarcity mindset urging an intense competitive spirit, because if you stand in a queue, you're sure by the time you get your turn, there will be nothing left. So you're going to fight, you're going to be aggressive, you're going to try and get ahead of that queue. It's just ingrained in your DNA. And women aren't helping. Women's expectations are of an Uber provider. I'll just read one. An unemployed woman rejects a groom with 8 lakhs salary, wants someone more than 25 lakhs per annum. So women's expectations also from men are that if you're not successful, you are not going to be of any use to me. So this is not a place where women are being very liberal either. Yeah. So the point I'm simply making is that the structure and the environment, the survival playbook for men in India demands that they sort of cultivate certain qualities, that they're competitive, they have a will to win, they need to be aggressive, they can't be weak. This is not a society where they can survive by being weak. This is not a society where they can survive if they don't sort of fight hard. And that structure, because the structure privileges certain ideas, which produces this masculinity. And unless we sort of interrogate that structure and we sort of create space for structural change eventually, we are only going to do lip service to portrayal of progressive masculine identities. The feminist movement has equipped women with what they need to create a more progressive agenda. Nothing similar ever. There's a brilliant paper written, Why Are There No Men's Movement in the World? To move masculinity forward, we need to find ways to align and build from what men want. And this is the other big point I want to make, that all progressive portrayal of masculinity comes from what women want from men, not what men want from men themselves. All our ideas of what a progressive man are women writing men stories, women writing men advertising, what women seek from men. They don't address the core identity production needs of men. And therefore, the real question to ask is, what do men really want? So we've seen this, right? In India, there's 2 binaries we talked about globally. So what we find is that the discourse is polarized. You're either heroic or infantilized. The progressive agenda is based on what women in society want and does not acknowledge what men want. Unless we figure out what they want, we will not be able to take masculinity forward. And how do we move beyond these binary buckets? So what do men really want? Just a few pointers. I mean, it's a long list. Few pointers. Before becoming the man, the family, the nation, and society and patriarchy or women want, they want to be their own man. They want permission to access and express the full range of emotions and vulnerabilities. They want freedom to make life choices without judgment and cost. And most importantly, where patriarchy creates the violence that men deal with, they want to learn to be kinder to themselves. And the other thing is, they don't want to be, just as the word women does not mean all women, the word masculinity does not mean all men. All men are not the same. We need to introduce the idea of masculinities and not just masculinity in our vocabulary if we need to move this conversation forward. So I think it's interesting that in India, popular culture leads advertising. I think advertising plays a catch-up role. It's more populist. So because of OTT, because of independent production houses, etc., we have started seeing that the spectrum of masculine representation is growing, the vocabulary around that is growing a little bit. And we actually find 3 very simple sort of discourses. So we will have what we call the antisocial man, because the system doesn't work for him. He has to hack it, he has to break it, he has to sort of challenge it. We also started seeing early signs of the pro-social masculinity, where masculinity is willing to sort of become a platform for everyone to move forward, very emergent. But what is really interesting is the fact that there is now negotiation possible, where men are saying we can negotiate with everybody else. We can share power. We don't necessarily always need to acquire power. And we're seeing, I'm not going to spend too much time today, but it's in the report, enough and more content, a primal idea, because some men still need to sort of, find that, access that idea of masculinity, which is not available in contemporary life. The interesting thing that's happening is the negotiation, which is a much more self-aware idea of masculinity. How do you deal with your own core anxieties? and some emergent sort of discourse around what we call pro-social masculinity, trying to expand the compact. Yeah. How do we move from this limited idea of mard to the fullness of what we're calling Aadmi? The first quote sort of caveat is that you can't do progressive portrayal at the cost of core masculine identity needs. We can't start sort of talking of progressive representation in a way that negates what men need to survive and thrive in this society, because that'll be rejected, because it doesn't recognize their crises, their anxieties. Second is that men don't have the visual and verbal vocabulary to articulate new ideas of masculinity. They need a new language. And that's what feminism did brilliantly. What women managed to do very well is articulate what they're feeling, what they're going through with language. They found the language that sort of cleaved them away from the sort of hegemonic, sort of masculine discourse of the time to start talking about, self-care, be your best friend, don't be your best critic. I mean, we invented all the language, how to, don't sort of feel judged all the time, do your daily check-in. Hundreds and more language was created, some of it in the sleep. Here we start talking about things like unpaid work, etc., etc. We sort of found a way to move the conversation forward, and men don't have that language yet. And most importantly, we need to stop over-valorizing narrow materialistic ideas of success. If there's one idea that sort of produces the kind of hyper-masculine toxicity in our culture, is a highly over-valorized idea of success, a very narrow materialistic idea of what success means. And everybody else fails, so everything else is failure. We haven't been able to expand this enough. Encourage and normalize new roles for men beyond protector provider, which I think there's some work happening. And of course, the full spectrum of masculine emotions need to be celebrated. So simply saying, can we expand the box of masculinity rather than hold it to account, challenge it, negate it, or sort of reform it? Can we expand the box of masculinity which does not sort of threaten core masculine needs, production needs, but finds the right context for the application? Can we give men more vocabulary and a bigger box, a bigger playbook, and sort of help them recognize when they need what? Not to say that they don't need to be strong, not to say they don't need to be able to fight, not to say they don't need to be competitive, but to recognize that there are contexts in which that works, but there are many other contexts for which they need new language, new vocabulary, new emotions. And I kind of love some of that content. And just let me end with this slide of where Virat Kohli, one of the great icons in India, started, and his idea of brash masculinity, to how he has expanded the box of masculinity for himself and others by also role modeling a lot of other ideas now of being a great partner, being a great father, standing up for other people, etc. So just in a very simple sense, 10 years back, that would be the only imagination of, one of our heroes. So just to recap quickly, the progressive liberal discourse doesn't equivocally mean the same for men and women. A lot of what we call progressive gender portrayal is actually written through the woman's lens. It does not recognize masculine anxieties, and it does not make it acceptable to men. We have to work through the core demands of masculine identity production. We will connect more if we steer clear of making men feel weak. And in some ways, we are simply saying partner men the journey away from the limited idea of mard to the fullness of Aadmi, encourage a diverse idea of masculinities over a monolithic understanding of masculinity, where all masculine values are valuable and none are negated. Just to end this quickly, masculinity without purpose masculinity is not the problem. When it has no purpose, it becomes toxic. Masculinity with purpose makes it more heroic, makes it more culturally valuable. Yeah. So that's 50 pages of a report for the brave in 30 minutes.
Let's also open the floor for some questions from the audience. Who's asking for the first question?
So I really like the idea of your saying expanding the box of, rather than challenging and negating, because that is possibly creating a lot of counter movement. And we're seeing that at all. Name names and politics of, let's say, Trump and the pushback on the DEI, which is happening in the world, and corporates seem to be, again, turn them the tide. Now, specifically in the context of marketing, communication, advertising, honestly, you said that popular culture is changing, not enough, but advertising is 2 steps behind. When brands take on the mantle of depicting what is desirable masculinity, and I'm giving a couple of examples. I mean, you had a brand which used a tagline, definitely male. You had a brand which said complete man. And you have a liquor brand which says men will be men. And we've seen the kind of advertising they've been doing inconsistently and seemingly successfully. Otherwise, why would they do that? Do you think we are feeling as the advertising community or the brand marketing community of narrowing the box and pushing in the things in the wrong direction?
So if we agree that we need to make space for all masculinities, then we may not have the right to judge that work through a narrow progressive lens. I think what you're pointing out is that we will have to work much harder if beyond selling and beyond sort of profit, we actually want to move the conversation on masculinity forward. For those brands and those companies that sort of commit to that, they'll have to work much harder because there is enough market which still responds to ideas which make them feel safe or secure or reaffirm traditional ideas of masculinity, and they should be as legit. Why would we want to judge those as not? So I think it's a choice.
Yeah, my question was the fact that, when you say men will be men or definitely male, there is one particular portrayal.
That's true.
I mean, your hashtag was not all men.
Yes.
So moment you're saying men have to be this, you're equating with something else. You're automatically saying nothing else can be a man.
Right. You are.
So that's my point.
So so the world competes. It's a world of competing ideas, right? Does it create opportunity for a more progressive brand to then put out an alternate imagination of masculinity?
Okay.
So to me, that's what it is. If we are competing for alternate imaginations for this country, for what being successful is, for what being a man is, what being good is. So rather than judging one versus the other in my head.
Okay.
Hi, Arvind. I wanted you to touch upon a little bit in terms of social media and how, does that offer an outlet for men to be, to express more of who they are? I mean, we do see very interesting depictions of men. I mean, besides, of course, the more traditional ones, but we also see, just more variety. So what do you think the role of social media and even beyond advertising, user-generated content, and, how does that play in shaping or opening up the conversation?
Actually, it's the interesting thing is a lot of, as cultural approval for men sort of went down, for certain masculine ideas went down, the new underground became the social media. So actually they felt they were in a more safe space to really say what they want, because they couldn't say it in this room anymore. They couldn't say it in the office anymore. They probably couldn't say it in their homes anymore. So actually social media has amplified a lot of the more baser, what we call baser tendencies or more primal sort of needs, which are not being addressed in society because society no longer sort of values them. So a lot of social media is actually not progressive in that, to use that word. It is not a place for progressive portrayal, but it's a place for very authentic portrayal of what men are feeling. They're actually more authentic there in my view, because they don't need to varnish and they don't need to polish what they're saying. So it's also all the studies on social media have actually shown that you tend to gravitate only towards opinions you like. You do not want unlike-minded people. You don't want to connect with unlike-minded people there. So it's actually sort of the polarization is actually being accelerated by sort of like-minded groups, sort of not talking to each other anymore. So
what do you think would be the best way to get this through? I think I've been working on this project for about 2 years now. And we have a lot of very wonderful men in India doing a lot of good work, not purely as allies, but actually changing the conversation. But trying to pitch this to mainstream media, they don't want good stories anymore. It's all about violence. It's all about, projecting a certain image. So what would you or people in the room as communicators think would be the best way to get your wonderful thoughts? And
so our argument actually is the opposite, if I may. Our argument is that it's the agenda of women and liberals to move men forward. We need to make it their agenda. It's not the agenda of most men. This idea that they need to have a more progressive portrayal and language is what some of us perhaps feel is required. And they haven't signed up for this because it doesn't help them survive and thrive in the world and in the world that they sort of, compete and win in every day. And which is why this conversation needs to be funneled through where they are. And sort of we need to find a way to speak from where they are rather than from where we want them to go, A lot of this progressive portrayal comes from us, the producers of content, because we believe this is progressive. If you think of the feminist movement, it was women deciding for themselves what was progressive. we need to find a way for men to start sort of doing that rather than us doing it. And I think we don't realize that enough. That these are our ideas of what men should be, not mainstream, mass Indian heartland men's ideas. See, privilege is the other big thing in India. We haven't talked about it. We can make life complicated because actually what they're fighting is privilege in India. The two Indias are not even so gendered. Actually, they're more privileged versus non-privileged, and so this is a privileged conversation. Liberal conversation and progressive conversation is a privileged conversation. They do not have the luxury mostly to be part of this conversation. I mean, that's how I'd put it. So, and which is why actually the divide is going up, it's not going down. So can we challenge some core ideas that only if you're successful, you're valuable? If you fail, there's nothing. Or there are other ways to sort of, assert your strength or the fact that, what is valuable to you. Can we expand that language rather than sort of seek reform or accountability or just negation, which is where it mostly sort of ends up. So we actually say, can we find men more purpose, new purpose to chase? They'd probably be better. They need something to chase. Let's put it like that.
My question is a direct segue. Are there any exciting examples of language, right? Because unless we have some words to latch onto, this conversation is not going to move ahead. So any that came across in your study or any we can use as a guiding light to think or create better content?
Sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Any specific words that help give shape to this idea that can help us carry this conversation ahead or make better, more aligned content?
So actually, we are calling out the poverty of language. Though you will find in the paper there is some attempt to scrape through where we found something interesting, but largely we are actually calling out the poverty of language for men. And for example, if the brand called Men Will Be Men, Imperial Blue wants to move forward, what is the language and imagination available? Even if they decide to move forward, what is available to them? So that's a lot of work.
What we're finding in our markets is that it's the very young men whose mothers were, I suppose, part of the whole gender equality movement. And it's the sons of those parents who are now leading what we refer to as the toxic masculinity movement. And I just wondered if that's the same in your market in India, whether it's the young men that are pushing back more than those who...
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. In fact, I had a chart on the gender gap with 18 to 29-year-olds voting very differently. The gap between how liberal and conservative women, more liberal voting by women and more conservative by men. And that's true in India as well. Across various parameters, the people who feel they have the most to lose if the world changes is men. And because of how competitive and how difficult the economic and social sort of environment is, men are sort of seeking simpler, more sort of simpler playbook, a more regressive, if you want to call it a more conservative playbook to hold on to. Because by dismantling patriarchy, we haven't given them something. We have taken away their core stability. We've taken away the structure that they had. We haven't replaced it with. And which is why you just look at our mainstream cinema. It kind of reinforces the most traditional heroic ideas of good versus bad, winning versus losing, right versus wrong. If you just have to go back, a lot of people in this room may not be able to consume it anymore. It's so primal.
And where does spirituality fit in the mix? And is that, so in the Western cultures or the European cultures, with the, I suppose, wind down of religion in the sort of Catholic or Protestant sense, they haven't got that construct of a Christian life that possibly their parents, grandparents had that would remind them of what, in effect, was being, a good human being. So is that the same in India? Are you losing spirituality in young men that used to be there?
So actually, if you see the whole world, left liberal ideas have been retreat for the last decade. And we're seeing a rise of a more sort of conservative, a more traditional idea across cultures. Because what we realize, even in India, actually is that people felt disconnected from their own culture and traditions. And the last 10, 15 years have been really about sort of reintegrating into your own traditional sort of idea of, how to live, how to be a man, what you value. So if anything, if you use the word spirituality, it's very difficult, but if you use the word tradition and culture, massive interest and massive investment by all age groups in sort of reconnecting to it. Because we try to build a country by disconnecting ourselves from our tradition. We try to build a modern, secular, sort of Nehruvian nation which said, no, there's no room for religion and culture within it. And it created a sort of an elite class, an English-speaking elite class which sort of hegemonically ruled this country, the privileged class for 70 years. And what we are now seeing is the vernacular sort of rising and saying, no, this is our country, these are our traditions, this is our language, and we can't be second-hand citizens in our own country. So we are seeing a massive sort of, and across the world we are seeing that, a massive sort of grassroots movement where people want their core traditional culture to be much more valuable rather than progressive sort of secular ideas, which, like I said, are ideas for privileged people in my view mostly. Most left liberal parties are the privileged parties now. They really don't talk to the heartland anymore. So structure, we've taken away the structure. I think we've just taken away the structure men need to operate. We've dismantled it.
I don't know whether my question can be answered by reading the report, so apologies about that. I was wondering whether you had any thoughts around what ASCI and other advertising standards bodies around the world could do in this space, whether there's a normative role to play or a more descriptive role. Any thoughts about that?
My sort of core belief is that the market sort of, market forces will be more powerful than any noble agenda. So I think it's probably just sort of also recognizing that there are market forces that are untapped. Maybe a better way for sort of to point companies to those forces may be more useful than trying to, sort of manage them, finesse them. I think they eventually, when they see an opportunity in some of this, in sort of moving masculinity forward as a business opportunity, they will all sort of, they'll chase it. And I think the fact that they don't see it, it's gray and dark, is where you could shine light. ASCI, bodies like ASCI can definitely shine light because it's there. There are enough ideas there which sort of men would like, there are enough role modeling. They like those to be role modeled. And conventional brand marketing advertising doesn't see those for various reasons. It's sort of blinkered in many ways. It doesn't go there. Its methodologies, the way they do research, etc., doesn't allow them. So maybe short answer, maybe help them see things they don't, be a bit more brave. But I think it'll be the opportunity in the market. One day we discovered women as a opportunity, and you can see what happened in the next 10, 15 years, how marketing just changed, right?
My name is Renu. I'm not from the advertising space. What I'm hearing is that women have, and women's movements across centuries now, they've been chipping away at patriarchy effectively. And those movements have now have a term which is, they're identified as feminism. And men, as you say, don't have a vocabulary, don't have a movement, don't have words for it. But the feminist or the feminism does not work without men being a part of it. So what is so hard about men accepting and embracing this as their vocabulary, as their movement? Because in the simplest and purest form, all it means is equality and equity in a word. And what is so wrong in embracing that?
The feminist movement allowed women to expand their space in society. The problem with men is they try to hold on to the power they had. They try to hold on to the space they had. For them, it's a loss. You understand? Which is why psychologically not enough men recognize that equality is good. Psychologically, subconsciously. Because it looks like a zero-sum game where they're giving away something that they had. They're giving away a job, or they're giving away their rights, or they're giving up their space. So the movement, the same idea works very differently for both genders. There's one gender trying to create more space for itself, the other gender being asked to cede space in many ways. And which is why they don't come to that idea equally, emotionally, with the same sort of resources. And which is why for privileged, like I said, for privileged people, sometimes it's easier because they see the expanding universe. For many people, they see it as an either-or, zero-sum game, and that sort of makes them, try to hold on to. And the other part is that they're romanticizing what they had. And because they don't have enough things to romanticize in the future right now. So they try to go back to, the golden age, the age when they were great, the age they were powerful, the age when nobody asked them questions. So subconsciously there's a yearning. So I agree with you, cognitively I agree with you, why should they not? But I'm just trying to tell you what the problem is, what the emotional and psychological problem for masculinity is, and why they don't sort of embrace this discourse the way women did. Because it's not a movement forward in their head for them. It's a loss.
Just a follow-up comment. I mean, it's definitely not a movement forward, which means any form of advertising narrative, if were to spin this, it's regressive in my view. And what we need is a movement going forward, wherein, I mean, from women not being a part of the table or coming to the table, and we're only going to take more and more space. So, I mean, it's either equal, and there's no going back from men getting 100%. So, I mean, I'm not sure I accept the narrative.
Sure, I agree.
I have one statement. While it's all good to have equality, but I think your entire supposition and your comment seems a little regressive, because perhaps you're not really attuned to what is happening in the real India, where there is a fair amount of oppression. You have almost painted feminism as something that is a negative and regressive movement, when the fact of the matter is that your masculinity that you're talking about is perhaps a lot more toxic than what it perhaps should be. So, I'm really appalled with some of the stuff. Perhaps I should see the entire report. But clearly, we cannot have a situation where we are talking negatively or even trying to suggest that, masculinity has to rule and, down with feminism, which is almost what you're trying to project, or perhaps what I'm gathering from there.
I sort of love your dissent and impassioned. None of those words were used by us. That masculine needs to rule or feminine needs to not be, none of that. We just wanted more empathy for the man, a little bit more empathy for the man, versus a very easy conversation that they need to change and they're wrong. We just wanted to nuance that, fully acknowledging that what is happening in the world is problematic. So if that nuance is lost, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy if somebody doesn't like our report too. So thank you for that.
Congratulations on your report. The feminist in me from 10 years ago would have said, I think I have a hard time feeling sorry for you men. But today I would say we receive this with grace. We understand your confusion and struggle. There exists a feminist movement. I've been a part of it, very proud to be a part of it. There are hundreds of reports that we've written. I come from the civil society, by the way. I'm not part of the advertising world. Your report sparks an idea of maybe a masculine movement. I'm still saying maybe. How do you think both of them can, coexist? Because that's what I see it going forward.
So I think somebody pointed out already, some of the best feminists for men. And maybe now women need to help men rather than just hold them to account. And I think that's really where gender convergence will happen. Because there's a true lack of understanding within men themselves and with women as well, what is happening. And that's bringing out the worst in men and not the best in men.